That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everything we show here is like public stuff and like notional data, so it's all fine. Yeah. So I think I've heard you've already been working with Palantir already. Been meeting with a few of my colleagues. Also, I think in Palo Alto, I think you visited as well, right?
No.
Oh no, that was
Washington DC.
Washington DC. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We Axide and Ryan.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, it's amazing, and and so my question is basically, like, I want to show you much more, of course, right? Everything you're interested in, but where do you want me to start? Because there's a million places I can start. Like, should I go back to like from square one of like, what is our software? How does it work? Or do you want me to go more into like, because you've heard all of this already, go more into like a specific workflow, a specific aspect you're interested in? Because I can do all of it, but obviously, your time is very precious, so I want to focus on what you think is most interesting to all of you.
Actually, we are wondering about Palantir's user interface and Palantir functionality in terms of the Foundry and ontology base.
Yeah. Okay.
We are actually interested in the AIP, but we want to focus on the Foundry functionality.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, that's usually where things start. So that's Have you already seen this part of like this architecture of the ontology? Have you seen this already?
Yeah.
Okay, all of you?
No.
Or should I?
Okay. I'll let it so. But I don't know.
Actually,
Okay, maybe.
Just me.
Okay, maybe I'll do like a very quick 2-3 minute recap, because I think it's quite important on like how we think about our software and like what the foundational elements are, because then I think the front ends also make a lot more sense. So fundamentally, everything we do is centered around what we call the ontology. So you'll hear this word, you've probably heard it many times already from Akshay and everyone else, but you hear this very often from us. What the ontology is really this human understandable representation of your business, right? So looking in the center here, you have, for example, your customer. I like using this one as an example because I think everyone knows what a customer is, right? But if you go to different places in the company, you get very different answers. If you ask, what about this customer, Nike, for example, right? And so because if you go to the salespeople, they might hear, oh yeah, we spoke with Nike last week. They anticipate 10% rise over the next 3 years in volume. So can you supply that? But then if you talk to people on the production floor, like in the factories you're visiting, they might know, oh yes, for Nike we're building, this batch of shoes, maybe this one is delayed, this one is at risk, this one might, you might have supply chain issues. Very different answer, but it's both correct, right? And so what we do is that's why we integrate, we bring in all these data sources which relate to the customer, for example, like your CRM, your SAP, your MES, whatever it needs to be, right? So it can be all kinds of different types of data sources, or also like, whatever custom table you have, an Excel spreadsheet, everything you have, right? And then we map that to the customer object, the order, the warehouse, maybe a forecast, whatever is, of interest. And then we also integrate the logic sources, right? So for example, it can be an entity resolution model, it can be some simple rule-based logic, if this, then that, or it can be, deep machine learning of something as well. And then the third part, which I think is probably the most important one to some degree, is the connection to systems of action. Why is this important? Why do we focus on it? Because we don't want to do dashboarding, right, where you just aggregate data up, but we want to drive decision making, right? That's the important part of, if I click a button in my platform, does it do something for my company? And so that's why we have these bi-directional connections. So we get data, but we also push down data again. For example, that when you want to notify a customer, or you want to, schedule a delivery, or you need to maybe change a supplier, right? That you can actually do that from the platform and feed it back into your systems of record or your systems of action. And then so that's like the fundamental building blocks. And then once you have this ontology, and we build it up successively, right? So we focus on the first use case, build the object types for that, and then you have a next problem and the next problem, and then over time it builds up. And then on top of that, you then build your, have your analytics and workflows, and that's something I'm going to show you in a second, right? Like your applications which an end user uses. But you also have your automations, right? A lot of it, as you said, like AIP is something you're very interested in. So that's where that comes in a lot of like, how do you automate, for example, there's maybe a recall of a product, or there is maybe a quality issue, like how do you escalate to the right people so you can run those automations. And then also the third thing, products and SDKs, is basically you can like build also your completely custom solutions on top of this ontology. And it's all with the goal of having AI and human teaming as the end state, so that you have AI doing those things which are, you know, like those repeatable processes, those things which people shouldn't take time or spend time on, so that all of you and your teams can focus on those things, like those difficult edge cases where you need to take time to investigate, or where you just need a human to, like, you know, make a very, you know, very complex decision, right? So that they have time for this and don't, you know, have to spend the first 5 hours of their workday clicking through individual things, right? That you automate those. So this is like high level how we think about our software. Does that make sense? Any questions on this so far?
No.
Okay, great. Then I'll jump over to this screen now, because all of this is backed by this ontology, right? So this is like an application which was built on top of this, but this is also completely customizable, right? So this is built in something called Workshop, which is our low-code, no-code application builder. But all of it, I'm just going to briefly go into edit mode just to like kind of show that to you. So all of this are like building blocks, like Lego, right? And if I want to add a section here, I can add a section, I can add a widget. Oops. Sorry, my network is a little bit slow, so everything is a little bit slow, but yeah, I get my widgets which I can add and, like, you know, reference those ontology objects and, you know, build my application, right? So everything you see today also is a version of how you can build on the platform, but the solution for every customer looks different, right? There is no one size fits all. We work with you to build what is important to you, what you care about, your logic, your interfaces, right? And that's a very important part for us.
How many widgets do you have?
Oh, a lot. There's a lot of widgets.
A type of the cards.
Sorry?
The widget has a type of card.
Yeah. So you, for example, want to add this metric card here, then I can go and I can configure it. I can, you know, like set it to an existing file or whatever variable in here or something like that, right? So this is completely, maybe that's a bad example, but or I can have a number, right? So maybe there's some number variables here. There's none. Okay, never mind. But what I can also do, and that's also an important part, going back here. So this, for example, is also a custom widget, right? So you'll see this up here, custom widget. So you can also build completely, you know, custom front ends using React. So you have this low code, no code application building part, which is really quick for iterating. But you can also build whatever custom, you know, widget or full application you want as well. So you always have full flexibility between, you know, like out of the box things to get moving really quickly. But if you hit any like edge cases or like I can't do this one thing, then you always have like full pro code options and AI coding assistants, of course, which make building them very easy nowadays, right? So that's kind of like this was a lot of like background of like, you know, the platform and how these things work, but I think I like sharing this because I think it's a really useful like grounding of everything you see, that you know, it may look like this for you, it may look different, but it's always centered around what is your process, your business, and so on. Okay, yeah, and so this is like an example landing page, right? And interrupt me at any point in time if, you know, there's any questions which you may have for a fictitious business. In this case, it's a business which creates medical goods like masks, syringes, those kinds of things. And they can see, you know, how you have all this map here of your different plants, and maybe my Boston plant is something I'm interested in. And so I can zoom into this and like, this is my state of the world, right? And I can maybe open that selected entity and I see, you know, what we call the object view which is you can reuse this across your applications, which like if someone wants to look at this, what information do they care about? And also shows, the ontology is multimodal, so we have like some data points, you have some aggregations, you have maybe some time series data of CO2 emissions, you have geospatial locations, you have, like maps, for example. But then also you have, downtime events, for example, right? So you can quickly see everything you care about this plant in this one object view, right? So I know exactly what is the health of it. Is it performing well? Is it underperforming, right? Like what is happening over here so that I can focus my attention on what I actually care about. And this is like really good to giving you an overview of everything that is happening. But one thing but so far what I've shown you is all like more dashboarding, right? Like gathering information. But what you care about also a lot is, I think, like how do I now run business processes better, right? And this is where I want to jump quickly into this automation hub, which is kind of what's running in the background to some degree. And so here we have all these different agents. Some for order fulfillment at the top, but can also be for all kinds of other problems like maintenance copilot or support ticketing or payment processing, like every kind of problem you care about. And what happens here in the background is that like new situations, scenarios come in, right? And then we have logic, and I can show you in a second also like what this logic looks like, how you define it, because your logic will look different to your logic as someone else's, right? How you define this in the platform. And then the agents process these things, and they either like go directly to the third part completed, right? If it knows the rules, it knows the situation, it will just do it. But maybe, and that's where this human AI teaming you saw at the top of the other tab comes in, you might want to flag it to human because a human might need to jump in. And that's the second column of action required, right? Where we need a human to review. And it may be that this is because it's a situation it hasn't seen before yet, so it doesn't know what to do. Maybe there's no rules defined, or we have rules defined that for these cases, we always need a human, right? Like maybe this is your above a certain value, right? So maybe it's like above $1 million or above $100,000, like whatever you want your cutoffs where you don't want your agents, but you want a human to always review. Or it could be, you don't have a rule yet, it hasn't seen it before. Whatever the reason is, we can make sure that a human gets put into the loop and then goes in and takes that decision. But then very importantly, when they take a decision, it also gets captured in the platform. This was the context, this was the decision. And then you can also use that to build up new rules over time, right? So let me just maybe jump into this explore part, because I think that's a good example of it. So here we have one example where a customer is asking for 10 cubic centimeter syringes, right? So for like injections, right? And we don't have enough of them. But we do have enough of 20 cubic centimeters, so bigger, right? Well, I mean, you can use a bigger one and fill it less and you have the same result. So maybe this is a swap we can do. But we don't have a rule saying that we can do this right now. So that's why we surface it to the user. And then the user can actually go in and now via this take action decide, yes, we want to do this, or no, we do not want to do this, right? Because for whatever reason it is. And this is that part of what we call human in the loop, and where those feedback loops also get generated, so that you have control over your automations, but also have good ability to manage your logic over time, because it will evolve over time, right? You're not going to sit down and write down all edge cases first day. It's impossible. You might not even know what your edge cases are, but then you can build this up over time. And jumping over into this feedback loop part, there's also an application for this called the Enterprise Knowledge Manager, where you have your principles which have been approved, right? So these are the ones, so you can review those, who approved what at which point in time, having full visibility into what those are and where they came from.
Data problem. that approved principles is automatically made.
In this case, it was approved by a person. So like Rachel Cooper, for example, approved this rule.
okay.
Like we always want to have, like of course it's up to you to decide where you want to set the threshold of where you want humans versus AI, and it's like a dial. It's not a one size. It's however you feel comfortable, and over time you maybe feel more comfortable with the AI, but maybe at the beginning you don't, right? And so you want more humans, and so these principles you probably do want to have a human do that, but also like open principles. So for example, the one example we saw earlier with the 20 cubic centimeter syringes for 10 cubic centimeter, right? Like that is an open one. It hasn't been approved yet. That's why it came up on the other screen. But I could now go in and review this one and maybe say me as a manager or someone else with like sufficient high privileges, right?
Principles is some kind of rules and criteria.
Yeah, exactly. That they can then go in and review this.
저게 너무 잘 되고 있는 것 같아요. AI가 저걸 다 학습하니까 데이터하고 저거에 기반해서 다 판단을.
Yeah, so this is like a little bit about that part. I think it would be interesting to also show a little bit like behind the scenes a bit more again, because what I've shown you now is a lot of like the front end, but which hopefully looks nice. But I also always enjoy sharing sort of the technical details behind the scenes, because I think it's helpful to explain how do you build this, right? I showed briefly how you edit a front end. But I think it would be interesting to also show a little bit like how do you integrate data, how do you build these like logics, which then get evaluated, right? Would this be interesting? Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'll just jump back briefly because this is your time. I can talk about whatever you're interested in. There's two bits I want to show. I want to show. Yeah.
I'm very interested in those.
Yes. I want to show this data lineage briefly, which is one peek behind the scenes. So it's a lot going on, so I'll explain what's happening. So on the left-hand side, you have your data sources, right? So your BigQuery, your Amazon S3, your Oracle, SAP, whatever it is, right? And then you have on the right-hand side, you have your ontology object types. That customer I was talking about earlier, right? This is what you want to have. And maybe this information from 10 different sources coming into this one, right? And so how do we...
I love this UI. Data, in terms of data lineage, it's very good.
It's a great one. It's a really old part of the platform, but we all still love it because it's such an easy way of understanding where does my data come from, right? Because it's a common question. If you just got a dashboard, it's like, yeah, but where does it come from? Why do I trust it? And so this is where this comes from. And so then you have, your various steps along the way. So you first have your raw table. Maybe let's take this, SAP Mara. I'm guessing you know SAP and you know it, right? And so I can go in and I can preview this and see, you might recognize some of those column names. They're all actually related to German words, so I have an easier time reading them.
I know the Mara table. Those the material.
Yeah.
Can I see this SQL script?
Yes.
Pad?
So the Scratchpad is one way where I can run interactive commands on top of it.
Mara is material master table.
But I can also see the code. Actually, I have to go on the next one because this is just a raw ingest. So the next one, this one here.
That actually code is automatically generated, right?
Yes, to some degree. So so this is the code generated now. This like cleaned Mara table, which looks something like this. Which has a bit more, like a bit of like columns removed and like cleaned up and so on. It still goes through a few more steps. But for SAP, we actually do have an out-of-the-box connector, which also has something called HyperAuto, which is like, because we have met SAP so many times, we have to do the same kind of like transformations frequently. And so there is basically out-of-the-box code generation, which transforms SAP from raw ingest to like ontology ready. So we do have that. You still might want to go and like modify for your like custom logic which you have in there, which we don't know out of the box, right? But yes, that's but you always like know which code generated what data. You also have a build history in here as well immediately. So like previously it didn't run, but like, you know, what were the last like successful runs of this? In this case, it got canceled because I think there was no new data. This data is quite static, but you basically get this full visibility into it, and then also, you know, like build timelines and data health, which is, okay, there's no views. Let me maybe find one here, and I can also change these views quite a bit of like what. Let's take this one here. Oops. This one failed. So
판타스틱하지. 야, 저렇게 다 연결했어.
Here we go. So for example, this one failed a health check because this is all like, it's the unglamorous part of the job, but it's what you need in order to make sure that all my data is correct and up to date, right? And so this is then the where I have a time since last updated, where I said this data set has to be updated. You know, for example, every day or like every 2 hours, maybe even every minute, right? Or maybe I have to go streaming, right? And then I want to check uptime. And so then I can configure these, and then I can be alerted as a developer when these fail, right? So it failed for some reason, and so I want to now go in and like fix this, and I can get, you know, in-platform notifications, emails, whatever I need. I can tie this into my like maybe your IT teams have already like, you know, these like PagerDuty or similar tooling, so you can raise alerts. Yeah, so that's like the part of like, you know, you integrate the data, you can do this automatically. What I showed you so far is also code part, but there is also something where I want to show resource type here. And I can keep, you know, dynamically changing how I view this lineage, right? This gets automatically generated. I don't have to manually do this. And so most of these are these blue data sets, but some of them are interesting because they're different. And so this one here, for example, is a Databricks table. So we also have, you know, like with Databricks, Snowflake, these kinds, I'm not sure if you use that, but we have something called virtual tables, so that you can leave the data in the source, but it's being synced like on the fly when needed, and it's being treated just like a normal data set. You can use it like a normal data set, but the data stays in the source system in this case. And we also have something called push-down compute, where you can like build the logic in Foundry, but then you get the data set being built actually in Snowflake, for example, if you prefer that. So these are like we're very open and architecturally want to integrate with how you want to do things, because we care about is that thing I showed earlier of like those workflow processes. We want to build those. And how do we get to the data, and like how do we connect it? We want to like tie into how you run your business already, right? And so this is like also a very interesting part. It's a little bit newer, but it's really exciting, so that we can be much more flexible. And then also another part I want to show is, so I showed you code, but there's also, you know, like Java transform or pipeline build data sets. So I can filter on those as well, and I'll see them here. And so this is a, oops, don't have access to this one. This one I do have access to. So this is like your low code, no code pipeline builder, right? So you can go full pro code, and we always allow for that. But there's also, you know, you can do your transformations, like, you know, I want to drop some columns, I want to, you know, create a unique identifier, I want to do joins, like, you know, all those things. But you can do this in low code, and that way also, like, maybe, you know, people who don't know how to code can actually, you know, interface with the platform more easily as well. Yeah, so this is a big part. And then also one thing I can also go into a little bit later is in terms of coding and so on, like automatic generation, we have something called, so you probably heard the term forward deployed engineer from us a lot already, right? Like I'm a forward deployed engineer. But then you have also in the platform a tool called AI FDE, which is basically the AI version of me. And so you can prompt it, be like, build me this kind of workflow.
Different type of you.
And it can interface with all the tooling, so it can like write pipelines. It both pro code and no code. It can define ontology objects. It can build front ends and everything. So you can just tell it, I want to solve this problem with this data, and it will do everything for you. Of course, there's still, you need to approve at certain times as a human because we want to have controls over it and so on. And it uses the same permissions as me as a user I have, so you don't expand permissions because you use AI. But it's also really cool tooling. Yeah, and this is how we get to this ontology ultimately, right? And there's also like time series data, for example, you know, if there's like more like IoT data, you know, which you might want to integrate, and so on and so forth. So it's this really like powerful tool set, which again, nowadays it's a little bit less interesting to many people because data is less cool than AI, but it's still a vital part to making it work. And then maybe one last part I haven't spoken about yet in detail, but I think it's also very interesting, is permissions, right? Because if you bring all your data into this platform, right, it's you of course want to have very clear control